Yes, my name is Lisa Haralampus, and I'm here today to talk about what's coming and what's ahead and speak a little bit from the NARA perspective. I work at the National Archives and Records Administration, and I work in the Office of the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. government. So it is my privilege to be able to work at an agency that cares a tremendous amount about how archives and records are created, managed, preserved, and even deleted. It's right in the title, National Archives and Records Administration. I'd like to begin the presentation first with just a few remarks about COVID-19 and its impact on the archives and on records management. For those of you who are interested or have not yet seen, we have released a few products, a few questions. We did start getting questions about records management starting in February and March. And so in April, we posted a frequently asked question guide. We had questions about our employees creating records when they telework. What if somebody prints out a record at home, prints out a message at home? Are those records? What about people who might be teleworking and have to use their personal email because the system's down and there was something that had to get done? A lot of our guidance applies in this situation. It's unusual for us, it's unusual for the globe, it's unusual for the world what we're doing right now, but our records management guidance has always been there and it still applies. So yes, records, if you're using personal email, you forward those emails to your official account. By law, you have 20 days to do it. If you have made a copy of a meeting, if you have printed something at home, those are still federal records, and you still want to adhere to your agency's record-keeping policies. Hopefully, that is the point of our session. The transition to electronic records has made life much easier and really showed some areas where the transition may be happening faster. I'd also like to just share a few words about how NARA is functioning. We are functioning and providing essential services wherever possible. The Office of the Chief Records Officer, I am happy to say we haven't really missed a beat, not too much, because we were telework ready in the beginning. So we're still able to do presentations like this. We're still scheduling and appraising records and doing our oversight and doing all we can with a little patience and a lot of perseverance. That's my motto for these two times. The only thing that we're not able to do, for those of you who are wondering, is we are not able to actually accession paper records into the archives, and we're not taking any shipments of records to the federal record centers. So we have not figured out a safe way to open our loading docks during the pandemic. However, of our 42 locations spread around the country, 19 of them are going into phase one, and we're expecting, as we do phased reopenings in those various locations, we will be able to resume more services. So you can always go to archives.gov/coronavirus for information. And if you're specifically interested in the Federal Records Center program, their URL is on the screen, and they are posting information about what locations are open and how and when. So with that, a little preview of where we are during the pandemic at this particular moment in time, let me go ahead to the main remarks and talk about the transition to electronic record keeping. I am the Director of Policy and Outreach, so I'm afraid my very first slide is always the policy. That's where I tend to think first. What was it that we're trying to achieve? Where do the drivers come from that are moving us to electronic records? And I'd like to highlight for you two documents if you wanted to read and sort of go back to the beginning and say, what are we trying to do? The first one, the most recent, was 1 year old. I think it's 1 year and 1 week old. It's the OMB NARA memo on transition to electronic records. The number, because we're in the government and we love our numbers and our acronyms, is M1921, meaning it's the 21st memo put out in fiscal year 19. The second document that I'd encourage you to look at is the government reform plan that was issued the year prior, June 2018. And for those of you who on my screen, I say government reform plan, but the official title is Delivering Government Solutions in the 21st Century, the Reform Plan and Reorganization Recommendations. That really laid out a template for how many different types of shared services, where was the IT modernization happening across the federal government. And as you can see with our little snippet, we are included in that plan. And in that plan, we said NARA is a part of the federal government's transition to electronic records. There's a third memo, which I don't have on my slides, but I'm just going to point out to you. There was a memo issued in April, that is M1916. It included the OMB cross-agency priority, the CAP goals for sharing quality services. And that also has an impact on how we're trying to modernize IT across the government and how we're trying to transition to electronic records. So that's what's driving us. But for those of you who are like, give it to me quick, I don't have time to read 30 pages of materials. Let me boil down for you our goals, because these are the drivers, and that is being good bureaucrats and having good governance. You lay out your policy, and then you lay out your targets. You'll hear me talk about these as targets and goals. And the reason this slide has an arrow is because my colleagues and I at the National Archives, we think of this transition to electronic record keeping as part of a continuum. We have been on this path for years. I probably could say decades at this point. And I was just talking with Troy before we began, saying it has been, as an editorial comment, it's been interesting to see how effective we have been able to be at our work when the transition to electronic records has happened. If this was happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I don't think we would have been able to provide as much support and conduct as many services as we have been. I know, at least for my office personally. So this is a continuum, and we have some goals. The first goal was by 2019, December 31st, 2019, that all agencies would manage all permanent electronic records in electronic format. And from my perspective, what I like to say is, if it was born electronic and you know it's historical and you know this is going to have historical preservation, which is what I mean by permanent, and you're going to want to send those electronic records at some point in the future to the National Archives so that we can preserve that as part of our nation's history, then dear God, do not print it out. If it was born electronic, it should stay electronic and come to us electronically. So it's actually a very narrow and tight goal. It was, again, if records are born electronic and they're designated to go to the National Archives, they stay electronic their entire life. My example of that is there are some websites that are scheduled as permanent. As you can imagine, we would like to preserve those websites as electronic records. Getting paper copies of a printout that we would scan would not provide the same access or user expectation as us being able to say, here's what this agency's website was at this point when they were working, when it was active. The next goal is 2020, and that is a NARA-focused goal. So you can take a deep breath, because the goal is that by the end of this calendar year, NARA will have policies and processes in place to support federal transition to electronic record keeping. So this is a goal for Lisa. This is a goal for the rest of the National Archives to do. But we would like our agency, we talk about this goal because of the impact it's going to have on agencies. And I'm going to talk about this goal a little further in my remarks. For the most part, what NARA is doing for this goal relates to the work of our federal electronic records modernization initiative. I've said it once, so you can hear me when I talk about FERMI later on. This goal has related to the work we're doing with FERMI to help agencies make this transition. And the last one I want to talk about, this path we're on, is our 2022 goal. This is the target that is a real driver. It was new when it came out in the 2018 and 2019 guidance. And this is a real stretch goal, because we are saying that by 2022, that's it. We would like all agencies to manage all records, their temporary records and their permanent records, in electronic format. That means some agencies will have to digitize paper records. Some agencies are mostly transitioning, or they have transitioned already, from paper-based processes to electronic processes. And to help put a little oomph to that goal, not only are agencies required to do that, but NARA, we have requirements. And our requirement says that after December 31st, we are no longer supposed to accept paper records. So if you had paper records that were supposed to come to us, we would be asking, where's the electronic version after 2022? I'm going to let that sink in for a minute or two before I then talk about exceptions. And you'll notice I didn't put the exceptions on this slide because that's not where our focus is right now. But the exceptions to the process, the memos say that if agencies have paper records and they do not anticipate a need to scan those permanent records before sending them to the National Archives. If there are records created, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s, they're getting close to their time for transfer. The recommendation in the memo is that if you send them to a federal records center before January 1st, 2023, they can stay in the Federal Records Center. They can be transferred from the Records Center to the National Archives. We run both, and we will take on the responsibility for digitizing them for access in the future. But if you're like, no, those records need to stay in my office, I'm still digitizing them, I still use them, they still have value, then agencies have to start doing some real strategic planning for how they're going to change their paper records to an electronic format for their eventual management and their eventual storage. So now that I've said that, I'm sure there are some chat questions, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. Let me answer the next question you might be asking. Well, 2019, Lisa, it's 2020. What happened in 2019? So every year, National Archives has its annual reporting period. And this is a brand new infographic, so you're getting to see it for the first time, and I'm getting to use it for the first time. So every year, the National Archives conducts its annual records management reporting, and it consists of 3 parts. And yes, it's very close to the 4th of July, and I was feeling a little patriotic, so we have a little red, white, and blue. The SAORM reports, that refers to the Senior Agency Officials for Records Management. Those are the positions that were created in 2012 for strategic thinking. The idea was records officers are often doing the operational work of records and information management in an agency. But who is giving them the strategic support, the strategic planning, and being a champion and advocate for the budget and resources? That individual is designated as a senior agency official for records management. And we ask them, we have for the past several years, to submit a report. And because it's a strategic report, it's not a questionnaire. It's more of a narrative report. And we ask, how did you meet, in your perspective, that goal? And will you be meeting the targets for 2022? So it's really giving senior agency officials a chance to talk about that. The other reporting that we do is our electronic records management. And new this year, we asked questions about ERM. So we had a template, should say a risk-based maturity model template, where we sort of said, okay, here's the 4 areas: policy, system, access over time, disposition. And we asked questions so that you could score yourself. Because it's we, the National Archives, do not want to know black and white, are you managing your email? Did you manage your yes or no? Because that doesn't give us information or data that helps us understand the lay of the land and helps agencies understand how to do better. So we ask a weighted question: do you have this type of policy? Do you have this system in place? And that gets us our score. And last but not least, we have an records management self-assessment. I almost did my acronym without explaining. An RMSA. And we have been conducting the RMSA for 10 years. And we ask basic questions over and over so that we are able to see how the records management's been improving over time. You can see on there, I'm going to move forward to give you some of the highlights. This slide, and yes, there are a few mistakes. Congratulations to those of you who can spot them. But it's brand new, and it came through, and I wanted to share the results that we learned. So we asked agencies, have you met the 2019 goal? And I recognize this is self-reported, but self-reported data showed that 68% of agencies say yes, in their opinion, they have met these goals. From where they wanted to be, they're very close. 32% of agencies are not quite there yet. We also asked agencies, are you going to be able to meet the 2022 goals? And we got a very high response. 97% think that they will be able to manage all of their permanent records electronically. And 92% think they'll be able to manage all of their temporary records electronically. It is no surprise. We saw this with our old 2016 goal for email management. We've seen it for the 2019 goal, and we're seeing it for the 2022 goals. A lot of agencies have said within the 90%, they think they'll be able to meet. And then when the goal actually passes, there's a little bit more of a reality, a little more realism check. They're not quite as far along as they expect it to be. That's the expectation. I'll just quickly say we also learned a lot of challenges that agencies are facing, and a lot of areas where they need support. And they're basically saying they need assistance to meet these goals. They need advocacy to meet these goals, and they need guidance. They have to know a little more clearly from NARA what we're expecting, and from other parts of the government, what are we going to meet? The advocacy is a strategic change and a strategic plan. It's not something that can be done by one organization or one unit. It requires agency-wide planning. And the assistance is definitely, there are still pieces that agencies need help with because it is everything. It's a complex problem. So how are they going to get that guidance and assistance? I mentioned before, I'm going to transition to the work we've been doing with FERMI. So FERMI has been an initiative at the National Archives since 2016, where we had heard loud and clear the data that we've received, and it's very consistent over time. NARA, you tell us what to do, but you never tell us how to do it. And it's frustrating. From our count at the National Archives, we count about 270 federal agencies. You know, there's many ways to count federal agencies, but we look at about 270. And those 270 agencies are all trying to figure this out on their own. 270 different approaches, 270 different types of budgets and processes. And while that is definitely appropriate for many agencies, because due to their specific mission or size or focus, all of them said we need help with procurement of ERM solutions to meet these targets. So we went on a journey with our patron saint. Now we laughed, when you make an acronym in government, you got to double check what the acronym spells. So we always have Enrico Fermi, the physicist, on our slide, which works in most cases, except for that one time we were talking to the Fermi laboratories. They were very confused. But other than that, Fermi is our initiative that we're doing. And with that initiative, we've got some partnerships and we've done some standards work. The first standard I want to focus on, because this is one of the main products, is our Universal Electronic Records Management Requirements. We first issued this document in 2017. We just recently issued it an update. So the work in 2019 helped us. We got feedback from agencies and from vendors. We heard questions about, well, what are you missing? And where there were certain areas that they thought we could have used some more help on. So we have went through our policy making process, and we have recently updated the Universal ERM requirements. And we focused, it still focuses on the requirements for the life cycle of electronic records, from creation and capture to reporting. And reporting is there to help our own records management staff. You need to know what you're saving. So if you don't have requirements on how to get data out of your tool, then it doesn't really work so well. So we made some updates to some of the standards. We added some sections, and we made sure to do a better job of cross-referencing where our standards came from. So you can think of this as a synthesis of what agencies need to do. And it was an important part of how FERMI works on giving agencies this guidance. I will then, I'm sorry, could I have a time check, please? I believe I have 10 more minutes. Oops, I just threw a quick chat to our hosts. 10 minutes, okay. because this is the part where I get so excited. I could talk about FERMI for an hour, but I will keep it tight and give you the highlights of what you need to know. So the first thing you need to know is that when we did this work with FERMI, with our initiative, with our standards, we also partnered with GSA, the General Services Administration, and we partnered in two ways. We partnered with one group that does category management. They were the team at the GSA that was responsible for getting vendors on schedule so that agencies could buy and use their tools and services. We also worked with the Office of Shared Service Procurement Initiative, and I'll talk about that in a second. But let me first go to the first partnership with our Schedule 36 category. This is the latest and greatest news. You may have heard me talk in the past about a special item number that was developed just for electronic records. It was special item number 51600. And that was a number that I liked because I could remember it. Now that GSA has changed and gone from having specific schedules to a consolidated schedule, electronic records management solutions is a category and an item, but it's got a new number, 518210 ERM. So if you're looking for that category to find that what vendors offer those electronic records management solutions, that is where you would go. And as you can see from the screenshot, I hopefully have given you enough information to find this page when you look for it and get to that schedule. The vendors that are on this schedule have all self-certified that their solutions and their services can meet the universal electronic records management requirements. And that is key for us. We're trying to help drive the solution space to finding innovative ways, to having some flexibility, to saying, I have solutions that can help meet those requirements, and this is how my tool works, and it can help solve one of your problems. And I say one of your problems because electronic records management, some people might be thinking electronic document management system or electronic case management system. Or maybe you're thinking, yes, I have some tools that I use to save all of our social media threads. I know everything I've ever posted on Facebook or Twitter or what system. Or maybe you're thinking, I also have my email tools, and I also have my geographic information system tools. We could play this game for hours. There's so many different types of electronic records that agencies create to conduct their mission. Some agencies, it's their whole focus. I'm an information dissemination agency. Some agencies are data science driven, and that's their goal and their mission. So finding a tool that meets their needs, it's not a one size, one solution fits all. It's frequently multiple solutions to handle the variety of data, the volume of data, how quickly it comes and how quickly it's being magnified. So we see these solutions as a great starting point. The requirements themselves could be used working on a statement of work or a statement of objectives. You could take that and say, this is what I'm doing and I'd like a little bit more. You can use the schedule to do some market research and find out what are the common costs and services that are used. We have really been, I just can't say enough about the good folks on the GSA office management category. They've been our partners now for 3 years. And we have done a lot of work together, including having an industry day in the past. And I will preview, we are planning to have another industry, I think we're reframing it as a collaboration day. There will be a GSA-led collaboration day on August 6th, 8/6. I'm sorry, I do not have that information on my slides at this point, but I will either share it in the chat afterwards or stay tuned to the National Archives. We will help make that information available. So that is the work that we're doing with GSA. But I also mentioned the Shared Services Office, that there's another partner in GSA that we're working with to help create that process in that framework. And I thought the easiest way to tell you in 3 minutes or less, what is that work, would be to share with you our FERMI journey map. And I had to take a pause there because it just occurred to me we've made a little bit of a tongue twister, the FERMI journey that we're on. This map is to show you the types of work that FERMI's been doing and the types of work that we're going to be doing. So just going back 2 years, you could see that we did have an industry day in 2011. We also worked and got those universal requirements out in, I guess, the third quarter. We also, in the fourth quarter, began working on the Federal Integrated Business Framework, the FIBF. That's the way OSPI, the Office of Shared Services Procurement Initiative, is working with all the shared quality providers. I said before there was another memo that's not on my slides, M1916, that talks about cross-agency priority goals. Sharing quality services, I don't have my notes in front of me anymore. I'm going from memory, guys. The Sharing Quality Services Initiative is where agencies have gotten together and said, again, why are we each one trying to solve one problem? Are there vendors and solutions providers that we can use across the enterprise, across the federal government? The National Archives is the standards lead for electronic records management. We are not a solution provider, but we are working on the Business Standards Council. We are part of the FBIF, and we are describing what standards we have to, the government should be using as a baseline for making this transition. We have also, again, you can see our slide's a little out of date. I have the old SIN numbers. We worked on more use cases, so we are developing not only our life cycle documents, but use cases and data standard items, and following the FBIF framework to make sure that the work we do can not only be used by agencies, but we're working with the other shared service providers. So travel records, finance records, grants records, a payroll. Those shared services that are providing a service across the government for different agencies, we want to have electronic records management baked into those processes so that when you buy that service, you're also buying the electronic records management services you need as well. Because those personnel records often are kept for 70 years, for those of you who may or may not have known that. And the National Archives, in the past, we've had those paper records, but now we're going to electronic records. So how can you, how do we manage those over time? And if you're paying for a service, what do you get with that service? So we are working with OSPI, we're working with the FBIF, and we're working to try to help really work, as I said before, there's nothing wrong with being a bureaucrat, and we know they're administrative records, but they're important records because they preserve the legal rights and interests of the government and government employees who work for us. And we want to make sure that the government, we always want to be able to say, we know what we did, we know what we said, we are there to have this institutional memory. So it might be administrative, or it might be programmatic, or it actually might be historical. We think this transition and this support from FERMI helps agencies get to where they need to be. Okay. What's next? I have 2 minutes to tell you a little bit more about what's coming. And I can say that, I'm sorry, I lost my notes. We are developing, you guys bear with me for 1 second. Now I can see my screen. We're developing an exceptions process to support M1921. We know that there are agencies that will not be able to meet that goal. It is a stretch goal, or they won't be able to meet it completely. I can tell you that our plans for the exception process are that, how can I say this? We're not expecting exception processes to come for, I found 3 boxes of records. Can I just send those to you? Do I have to scan them? That's not what the exceptions process is about. It's more about saying on a strategic level, this is what I need to do. I am going to keep these records on site in agency control. I'm not going to use a private vendor. And this is why I had a legal requirement to do that. Or there is, I am scanning my records. We'll be ready to go, but we won't be finished until 2025. So I need a 3-year exception because that's just too far of a goal for us. So we're really asking agencies to think strategically about what are their large challenges. And that's something that we, the National Archives, can work with OMB and work with our appropriators and have conversations about what's it going to take to finish this lift and get to fully electronic. My office, we are also working on digitization standards for permanent records. We have shared those standards for interagency internal review this summer. We are hoping to have them on the Federal Register in August or September. So fingers crossed. Like I said, there's a lot happening in COVID, and we know that there are some regulations that may have a higher priority. But if we're able to do as much as we can, we'd like to see those regulations out for comment this year. We're also working with GSA and talking about more commercial vendors being available under the physical records contract, since M1921 says, stop making paper and stop storing paper in agencies. There's going to be a push to using some commercial services. So they're trying to do work to make sure that GSA can support that. And I am laughing. I forgot I did this morning. I forgot that I did add that slide for the Industry Day registration. So if you are interested, you can find it. And that brings me to the end of my talks. There's how you can communicate with our office, both my email, our blogs, our website, and the FERMI page itself. And as you can tell, the archives, we always know what's happening. Here's the kids asking their questions. So what questions do you have for me?
Excellent, Lisa. Thank you very much. We're going to have to take some of the questions into the chat room because we're sort of running at time, but you also did a good job of sort of anticipating and answering several that came up as we went through. A couple that I want to highlight, though, before we transition to our next session, is there were a couple different questions about compliance. And you had the slide that showed the sort of, RIMSA reports, the percentage of agencies that had done that, and the SAORM. I guess two questions here. One, are those reports the main compliance metric, or is there some other yardstick right now to determine how many agencies are on track and how many have a ways to go?
We use those tools as our main oversight because it's the only way we can get comprehensive view into the world. We take the SAORM reports, they are narrative reports, and we post them on our website. We take the risk and maturity models, and we also have made all of that information and data available on our website. So I say the answer to the question is that is our main tool. We do oversight of specific agencies. We have issued a variety of assessments, but the world and the universe is large. So we might look at research and development records and how are those being managed. We might look at email, for example, and do it for 10 agencies and then see if there's examples that we can draw. So I'm afraid, yes, those are our main tools for government-wide insight, but you really will find a wealth of information that NAR produces on inspections and oversight. We have doubled that staff over the past 4 years, and we are developing better electronic records management oversight tools. So I hope that you can ask me again in 2 or 3 years, and I'll have more information to share. But we're getting ready for that. Thank you.
And then the follow-on to that with the sort of maturity model data and things like that, is there a list of the agencies that still need work? And this question actually came from someone within a government agency. Mm-hmm. It's not one of the reporters that are on the call asking, but is there kind of the watch list at this point, the equivalent of someone who doesn't have a good score on their on their FITARA scorecard for records management?
Yes, that's a great way of looking at it. I would say the answer is yes. That's why we make that data publicly available. It is self-reported, so agencies that do report, we validate some, but not all. So it's self-reported, but we make the entire score so that every agency, and again, it's the National Archives list of agencies that we have we come through. So for all of those agencies, departments, components, independents, and anybody who's to be on that list, you have to have the Federal Records Act apply. Mm-hmm. So there are some agencies to which the Federal Records Act does not apply. They're not required to report. But yeah, we share those scores. And that's why the maturity model is important. Because you might be doing strong in policy, but showing that you have issues with access over time. Right? I've got this, but I'm missing these parts. Agencies are doing strongest in systems and policy. We're still pushing to make sure they have the access issues over time. And I'm not referring to 508 accessibility. I'm referring to being able to find, locate, and manage information over time. Because if you can't retrieve it and reuse it, it's not available. So it's really these longer term, older records problems that agencies are looking for help. And it is remarkably difficult to delete. I will share that. There's always questions of data, information use, and reuse. So agencies sometimes they're questions about, are the disposition instructions appropriate, and are we able to execute them?
Okay.
So those are the challenge areas that we see, and it's across the way. So you can always look up your own agency and see what you said.
All right, very good. And last question for this segment. You did a good job of outlining the what might or might not count as an exception, and how this is how reality is going to come into these stretch goals. But is there an ETA for when the details of that that exceptions application process will come together?
Well, the memo said to do it in 2020, so part of that ETA is this year. But the actual answer is we've drafted some guidance, but it's taking a lot longer to get executive attention on this and to get that agreement, because it's not just the National Archives guidance, it's National Archives and OMB, and we want to make sure that we have good guidance. And there's been these other things happening. You may have heard about them in the news.
It's an understatement, yes.
Yeah. So we have some ideas, and we're looking forward to being able to present them. And I can only tell you we're working as fast as we can. And I hate to say it, but it's NARA soon. And more people say, when's that policy coming, Lisa? I say soon. And they say NARA soon. And I'm like, yes. So it's going to take me a while, maybe a couple more months. At least. Very
good. Well, thank you very much for giving us a great kickoff to today's event. And I know you're planning on sticking around there. I apologize for some of the questions I didn't get to, but some of them have already been addressed in the chat room, and others I know are very specific to individual use cases, or I know that we have speakers coming up who are going to address them in more detail. So we will get to some of these. And Lisa, please, if you see something else you need to chime in on, please pop into the chat room later. And thank you again.
Very welcome. Thank you, everyone. Right. Thank you for having me.